Ever find yourself in a meeting where your team keeps going in circles and you're the one who ends up solving all the problems? It's exhausting, right? As a leader or a manager, it can feel like you're carrying the weight of every decision while your team waits for you to give all the answers. But what if you could guide your team to make better decisions without having to do all the heavy lifting yourself? Well, I'm going to show you how you can use facilitation skills to empower your team to discuss and solve problems and ultimately become a better manager yourself, and how you can do that to free up your time and reduce the reliance of your team on you. We're going to dive into practical strategies for leading those discussions and avoiding decision paralysis, and particularly using what I call the bungee intervention, a way to provide just enough direction to keep your team on track without you taking over. Welcome to Destress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual. Now, have you ever been in a meeting where your team they're meant to be solving problems? Perhaps there's a problem that they've even suggested or one that you've highlighted, and yet everyone else seems to just be waiting for you to solve the problems. Or maybe you just feel like they never quite come up with a good solution or can't even approach it in the right way. As a manager, as a leader, that can be really exhausting, pretty frustrating, incredibly unproductive, and keeps you tied to the day-to-day, so you can't focus more on strategic and value-adding work. Now, there's a technique that I found really effective in my businesses and with our clients, which essentially uses the principles from facilitation skills. Now, facilitation is normally used in workshops, group exercises, and so on. It's something that I was trained in back when I was a management consultant, coaching and supporting leadership teams. But it's not just for that. It's a great critical skill that managers can use that can help them get their teams to share answers without the manager having to do all of that. So let's start with, what do we mean by facilitation, and particularly what does that mean for a manager and why is it important? Well, I recently had a one-to-one with one of my team members who felt stuck because their department kept coming to them for answers. And this led to a discussion with them on how they could coach their team to facilitate better discussions and problem solvings rather than them being the answer giving. So what I shared with them was a metaphor that I call the bungee intervention, where we think of facilitation as a series of potential interventions that you can take, and that we're, as the facilitator, we're on a bungee cord, right? And we start at the very top and we can go down and we can come back up. Now, facilitation is essentially the act of helping a group of people get to a desired objective without having too many fingerprints on it. Like, the idea is that you get the people to do it. And as a consultant, I used to do this with clients to help them come to a conclusion or agree a course of action without me having just told them what the answer is, right? And so that's something I used to do a lot as a consultant. But now I do it as a leader and as a manager of other teams, and I coach my team leaders to do the same. Essentially, what you do is, thinking as a facilitator, as a leader, whenever your team starts to go off track or perhaps get stuck on the first idea that they come up with, the first solution, you can apply just enough direction to pull them back onto the objective or back onto the right track, and then boing, bounce back out again. Now, it's key that you don't stay in the discussion too long, because it'll feel like you're owning it, and instead you want them to take the ownership again. So, for example, I was quite a while ago, back when I was heading up the sales and customer success for one of my software businesses. I remember where there was a particular problem that we had with, there was a client that essentially had a particular issue. It wasn't a mistake or a problem caused by us, but they were upset with the results, like where they'd got to, and so were frustrated and had expressed that with us. And so the team had raised this as, oh, we've got this customer who's not happy. It's not something that we did, but that's where they're at, and as a result there's this sour feeling, and we want to help them, but at the same time they're feeling like they're frustrated, they're annoyed. And so that problem needed to be discussed by the team to identify, okay, what are we going to do? What options are available? What do we communicate to them? What might we offer? What do we think is even a desired outcome? And you can imagine options might range from give them a refund and pass them on to actually let's jump on a call and, but what are we going to communicate to them to get them on the call and all this. So there's like loads of different options. And I remember in that particular meeting, they shared this is the problem. And I remember a specific moment of just stopping that temptation to just jump in and say, well, here's what I think we should do. And particularly in line with our core values, I'd be saying, well, our number one core value is focus on impact. So let's start with, what are they actually trying to achieve? What would make them happy and successful and so on? And let's work backwards from that and we'd move there. And I'd then look at our second core value and say, be proactive and dependable. Okay, what can we proactively do that means that? And so I'd be applying our values. I'd then be using that to come up with options. But as soon as, if I started to do that, I'd be taking the empowerment from the team. I'd be the one doing it. And so instead, I remember a particular moment where I just stepped back and said, so what do you think? And let a silence ring out amongst the team. And this was on a virtual meeting, it's on a Zoom. And so just let that sit and let people think and have a moment where they realize, yeah, we're the ones that have got to come up with the ideas. And I think someone shared a particular one suggestion, which is, perhaps we could offer a refund on the project that they've just done because they're not happy. And I think because it was probably one of the earlier times that I had sort of done this and been supporting it, and one of the earlier times that we'd kind of grown the team. And so I was practicing getting better at this. I remember the rest of the team kind of just feeling like, oh, good, someone shared an answer. So, yeah, sounds good. And so I could see that they weren't continuing to push forward with actually what other ideas, or even can we discuss, here's the benefits and disadvantages of that, and will that actually help them even achieve their goal? Is the financial thing their main issue? And it wasn't. And so I could see that was the case. So as a result, I, as the leader, after they were kind of just like, oh yeah, that seems like a good idea, they were then looking to me, even as virtual, I could feel it. I could feel them looking at me to basically go like, so are you happy with that? Or are you going to give us an alternative answer? And so I knew I shouldn't just say, well, I don't think that's right. Because if anything, that's slapping the person who came up with the idea in the first place and slapping everyone else for agreeing with them. And that doesn't feel great and isn't going to encourage them to do that more in future. So I encouraged them and reassured them. So I said, brilliant, you've come up with one option. What else could you do? And I think another intervention I made was to say, how could we use our core values to help us identify some more options? Or later on, once they'd got some options on the table, like evaluating them, I then say, okay, so based on the options you've got, which of these would you just rule out? And so by asking questions, I was able to help them come up with more ideas, filter those ideas down, prioritize them and so on, without me just giving them the answer. And over time, literally weeks, months, that team was then empowered to do all of that without me then doing that. Doing that facilitation, they were able to facilitate each other. And so it meant that it was then unusual that I would have to weigh in on a situation or have to do much facilitation. And the key, and the reason I call it the sort of bungee cord of intervention, is you do a little bit and then you bounce back out. When you ask that, when I asked that question about how could we use our core values to help us come up with more ideas, I don't then just keep going on and saying, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? I then give a bit of room so that they can then build on that. And if they then struggle, then maybe I can go back down the bungee again and then back out and see where they go. And I'll talk more about exactly what that looks like when I talk about like going down the bungee. What are the interventions? In this episode, I'm going to go deep into that. But I wanted to share first, like, what's even the concept of what does it look like when you facilitate that discussion, and how do you sort of start to get people to do it, to come up with those answers. And typically the time to intervene, to go down the bungee cord, is either where there are tangents, where people get derailed, where they go off topic. Easily happens, right? It might be that they get distracted by something else. It might be that they're not clear on the objective, and so there's lots of just idea sharing rather than working backwards and saying, actually, what is the outcome we need from this discussion? Is it a piece of communications to the customer? Is it a decision on which of these features we're going to develop? Is it we need to agree on how we're going to change our process for onboarding a new employer or client or whatever? Like, what is the objective? And then making sure that the discussion is heading towards that. And so as a leader, it's actually easier for you to spot when the team are going off topic and when they're not clear on the objective when you're quiet. If you're talking, asking questions and suggesting things and so on, it's very difficult for you to be able to also step back. So that's one of the benefits of facilitating the discussions. It allows you to step back, listen, see whether are they clear on the objective. Are they moving towards that objective? In which case, great. If not, then it's probably time to do some intervention. Another time is if they get stuck on a particular idea. So it's almost like they're proceeding to the objective super fast, but actually you kind of notice that they've just latched onto the first idea. They haven't explored alternatives. And as a result, they're not thinking widely enough around the problem to come up with a really good solution. And it's often said that if you want a really good result, a really good answer, a really good solution, come up with lots of bad options and pick the best one. That will often get you a much better result than if you spent a load of time trying to come up with one idea, get lots of other options and then pick. So that's a good time to intervene, is when you see everyone just very quickly resolving around one solution, particularly if as you as manager, if you're looking at it going, I feel like there's some other options that they haven't even considered. So that's another case. Another time to intervene would be where there's decision paralysis. So some teams can get stuck debating an issue. And instead, what you can do is identify if there seems to be some perhaps good reasoning. Like there might be, we can go down route A or route B, and there's pros and cons of each. And, genuinely, you can be in a situation where, actually either can work, but sometimes the team can get stuck because they feel like, well, there must be an answer. And sometimes as leader, the facilitation you have to do there is, yes, facilitate prioritization and helping them think through the pros and cons and weigh those up. But sometimes you just have to say, if there's not an obvious answer here, which of these could we go with? And if it turns out we're wrong, that we'd be able to change tack most easily. Or, based on your own view, you might say, it sounds like there's equal support for these and either could be right. Talk me through, if we went ahead with B, what would that look like? And what point we might turn out to be wrong or whatever. Like, you can help them then facilitate, or you can facilitate them getting to a point of actually almost accepting a decision, making an assumption around a decision, work backwards from that, and then either get comfortable with it or decide, actually, no, we need to go down the other route. So those are some occasions, those three, where they're either derailing off and deviating from the objective, or they're going straight for the objective without having done enough critical thinking, or where they've done the thinking and they just need help over the line to make a decision. Those are great opportunities for you as a leader to intervene and use the bungee cord of intervention to give them a little nudge and then bounce back out again. Now, I keep on talking about this bungee cord of intervention and going down the levels and so on. So what are the levels? Well, I'll take you through 10 of them, but arguably I could have said 20 and have one between each of these levels. So I've broken it down to give you 10 increasingly direct methods of intervention that I'll take you through and show you exactly what that looks like. But the key concept is that you only really want to go down the levels of intervention as far as you need to get them back on track and then bounce back out. What you don't want to do is jump straight to number 10 every single time. You want to go potentially gracefully through them, get to the point where you can see they're getting back on track, and then bounce straight back out again. Sometimes you'll only need to use level 1 or level 2. Sometimes you need to go down to 6, 7, 8. Hopefully you don't need to go to level 10. So what are the 10 levels? So let's start off with the lightest form of intervention at all, which is simply active listening. That's where you as the facilitator attentively listen, show your understanding and empathy without interrupting or offering solutions. And that encourages participants to just express themselves freely. And if everything's going well, you can just stay at that level. You don't need to do anything at all. The next level is to use reflective questioning, where you ask open-ended questions that prompt the participants to reflect on their own thoughts, their feelings, their actions, their ideas, and encourage that deeper self-exploration and reflection that then results in them sharing ideas. The next level is summarizing. This is where you summarize what the participants have shared, ideally using their own words, helping them to clarify and consolidate their ideas without adding your own interpretation or opinion. You're just summarizing, here's what I've heard, and then you can perhaps just use a question to then let them go off and carry on, and you can step back out. Next level will be encouraging. So this is where you encourage the participants to continue sharing or exploring a topic. Perhaps offering some gentle nudges or affirmations to keep the conversation going. So for example, if they've come up with an idea or two ideas, you can say, fantastic, what else? Or any other ideas? Or what other solutions could we do? Just getting them to go like, yeah, keep going. What else could you do? Next level, clarifying. So this is where you ask for clarification or elaboration on the points that have been made, helping them to ensure that everyone's got a really clear understanding of what's been discussed. Now, this is different to summarizing, because in summarizing, you're using their words to say, this is where you're at, so that they can see where they're at and then helping them to move forward. Clarification is where you feel like even if you summarized it, it wouldn't give them a clear perspective. So instead you're asking to clarify. So for example, if someone suggests, I think we should give a refund. So what's the reasoning? Good, that's a suggestion. What's your thinking behind that? What are the outcomes that you're looking for? Or help me understand, what would that look like? So you're asking for that clarification where you're getting them to then still come up with the more detailed. Next one after that, paraphrasing. So this is where you restate the participants' ideas in their words, in your words rather than theirs. So summarizing will be in their words. Paraphrasing is where you use your words to confirm understanding, show that you're following the conversation, but also perhaps help them over a hump. So perhaps the way that they're phrasing it, maybe you spot that it's not particularly helpful, or maybe it's causing confusion, or people are sort of not aligned on what's actually meant. And so you can show that you understand it, or check your understanding and paraphrase it, but in other terms to see if that kind of just helps them move a bit further forward. You can see as we go through these levels of intervention, we're increasing the amount at which the fingerprints that the facilitator is putting in, because now you are using your own words. If we need to be even more directive, we can offer options. So this is where you would present perhaps multiple options or just an idea or perspective for the participants to consider, encouraging them for them to then weigh that up against other options and choose a direction based on what resonates with them. Now, you have to be really careful with this, because sometimes it can be easy for the participants just to go, if you're suggesting that must be a better option or must be the best idea. And so that's really removing some of that empowerment. And so use that sparingly. Again, we're getting right down that bungee cord. The tightness of that cord should be telling you, I need to be further out of this in terms of my facilitation. But if you need to, you can get down to that level. If you need even more than that, you can go to suggesting. So this is where you perhaps gently suggest a possible direction, an action, or an idea for them to consider, while still allowing them to make the final decision. More from that, bit of guiding. So this is where you provide direct guidance on the process, the content, the specific steps or strategies to help the participants achieve their goals. The final level of intervention, the 10th level, like if you're doing this, then things have gone badly wrong in the session and you're perhaps forced to do it, but then you really need to come back out and consider how it got to this point. Last level will be instructing. This is where, as a facilitator, I'm not sure we can even call you a facilitator at this point, arguably, particularly if you're doing this a lot. This is where you give clear, specific instructions or directives and tell the participants exactly what they should do next. And you're doing that to ensure a particular outcome or to just grab control of what's happening in that meeting and get them to move. So it might be that you've perhaps tried different levels of asking the questions and summarizing and paraphrasing, and maybe they're still just not making that decision or moving on to the next topic, or they keep on getting derailed by a particular thing. This is where you could just instruct them and say, great, you've had that, I feel like you've discussed that now. Well done, you've come to a decision. I suggest let's now move on to the next thing. Let's now move on to the next topic, or let's put a pin in that, let's move on to the next topic. And so that's where you're instructing. You're saying this is what we're doing. I'm not saying, hey, here's an idea. We're instructing this is what we're doing. Now you can see that as we went through each level, the amount of direction significantly increases to the point, we started at active listening, just listening and showing that you're listening and giving a bit of encouragement, right the way through to just telling them what they're going to do. The key is to bungee down to the needed level of direction. And you can move through them to, start with some of them and then keep going more, but don't just dive down to number 10, right? You've got to move through it. And then as soon as you can see they're getting back on track, bounce straight back out again. Avoid being then stuck at that level. So we've talked a bit about the levels and when to intervene and so on. And it's important that you as a leader, a manager, facilitating these opportunities for your team to solve problems. It's important that you balance giving enough guidance to prevent failure so that they don't make a bad decision, but not so much that it takes away their ownership of the solution. You really want them to feel that they have had an opportunity to properly think, come up with ideas, weigh those ideas up, come to a conclusion, and that you've supported that rather than feel like you came to the rescue and just gave them the answer. Because facilitation isn't just about leading the discussion. It's about making sure the team takes ownership of that decision. You want them to feel responsible for the outcomes and for future problem solving, that they feel responsible for coming up with good ideas. They're not just throwing out ideas because they're meant to, but actually they know that those are ideas that could end up being the outcome and that they've then got to deliver that and live with that. So you really want to make sure that you're getting that balance right. So in summary, why is it worth investing in your facilitation skills as a manager? Well, facilitating those discussions and problem solving leads to higher team engagement, better problem solving, a more empowered team. And ultimately, you'll free yourself from always having to be the problem solver. Now, if we were to give you some quick fire tips on what you need to do to improve your facilitation, I'd say use silence. Let the team think. Avoid jumping in with your opinions too early, and encourage diverse viewpoints. Make sure quieter team members are heard and give them the responsibility for solving the problem, for coming up with solutions, rather than jumping straight in and telling them the answer. Instead, use that bungee cord of intervention to help them come up with a great solution that they're bought into, that they're empowered to do. And you will find that over time, your team are able to solve problems themselves most of the time, or with very little facilitation and support from you, which is an incredible feeling when you start to get that in your business, and allows you as a manager, as a leader, to be able to elevate and focus more on value-adding work. Now, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you found it useful, please do share it on social media, tag me in, and of course, subscribe so that you don't miss out on future episodes. Otherwise, until next time, have fun.